As I speak to you tonight from Toronto, the G8 meets in Potsdam, Germany. And as you recall, if you were listening last week, I was talking about the two-headed eagle. The Prussian, German, Holy Empire that was the Roman Empire that is now poised to take over the entire earth. Well, the G8 are meeting in Potsdam, which is the home of the Hohenzollern Empire. The home of Crown Prince Wilhelm Hohenzollern is Potsdam, Germany. How important is that conference they're holding this weekend? Very important. They're talking about global warming and just exactly how they're going to foist this on us so that we will have this massive redistribution of wealth in the world. And how important is Potsdam, the home of the Crown Prince Wilhelm Hohenzollern? Well, in 1945, from July 17th to August 2nd, participants of the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States, the three largest and most powerful of the victorious allies in the Second World War, defeated the Axis powers in World War II to morph the League of Nations of 43 nations into the United Nations of 192 now. These three nations were represented by Joseph Stalin, Winnie Churchill, and Harry Truman. 1945. They met there to decide how to administer the defeated Nazi Germany, which agreed to an unconditional surrender 9 weeks earlier on May 8th. The Sun Worshippers number. The month, the 5th month. 8 and 5 is 13. You'll hear more of the number 13 coming up in the show tonight. Michael, the Archangel Michael, fought with his angels and the dragon fought with his. The compilers of Revelations wove the esoteric with the exoteric, combining Egyptian, Persian, and Babylonian terminology and symbology together. On the one side of the battle, we see the good angels, each angel's name ending with E-L, the Semitic term for the sun. The good guys were really the summer signs of the zodiac, the Hebrew names being Michael, Abedel, Azrael. As a matter of fact, the name of the country is Israel. And we have Elizabeth II on the throne in Britain. The bad guys bore the Egyptian names for the winter months, their names ending with On, O-N, the Egyptian name for the sun. The sun in winter brings the signs of impending evil. So you see, both sides, E-L and O-N, the terminology, symbology, both represented the sun. So we have Abaddon, Apollyon, Taken in context, we see a Hebrew interpretation of the heavenly battle between the Egyptian and the Hebrew gods for the exoteric explanation. The Lord of the opposite was said to be established in the sign of opposition of where the sun happened to be. Astrology. This contrary god was called Belial, Baalzebub, Beelzebub, and was established in Scorpio, which gives the kiss of death to God's sun every autumn. Because that's the fall. The esoteric meaning in the battle of winter against summer. The very word autumn is made up of the Egyptian names Atum, old god of the world and darkness, matter, and Aten, the title of the beneficent sun, S-U-N. Hell was always said to be in the north, the great abyss, referring to the constellation where Draco revolves in an endless serpentine loop. Draco is one of the Latin words for snake. Dragon is an Egyptian term for the North Pole. That's one of those names that ends in O-N. Of course, the North Pole is where eternal winter is said to hold its hold forever. It's a continuous circuit of winter. Helping him were his Baal and Ons of Chaldea in Egypt. See, to form, even words, is to shape. And ideas come from words. People are shaped by informing. Get it? Information is neutral. It's like man's law. It's neither true nor false. The masters of Gnosis. Gnosis is literally knowledge needed and deemed to be essential to salvation. Dispensed the sequences of directives which, in scientifically designed order, form the ideas, opinions, and life. Your beliefs, reality, destiny of the receiver, which is you. When indoctrination is complete, you have been mastered. To doctor, of course, means to fix by a science or some kind of discipline. You are now a master copy. Not original, but aboriginal. Original people saw things in entirety. Pythagoras, for instance, taught us science of controlling the mind by reducing all thought down to mathematical formula. The real priesthood calls this the Trinity. It's as easy as A, B, C. The numbers of the alphabet. 1, 2, 3. Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio, just got started. The Greek philosophers taught the method in story form. An imaginary dialogue would happen between two or more people. By logic, every societal problem was reduced to the binary code. Either or. One or the other. We know it better as the dialectic process. The goal of a dialectic process, of course, is to merge point and counterpoint, thesis and antithesis, into a compromise or other state of agreement by how the words are used. Those following the process are brought to a conclusion. The conclusion becomes their own. You are now informed. Get where I'm going with this? This is what's now called brainwashing. Spaceman back with more in a minute on AM 640, Toronto Radio.
He goes deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But can you take it? This is A View from Space with the Spaceman. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
I'm the Spaceman. This is AM 640, Toronto Radio. It's A View from Space. Just talking about brainwashing. Sort of being doctored, indoctrinated. Sort of like being informed, but they form your ideas. Information is neutral. But the masters of Gnosis, the black magic Merovingian sorcerer kings, have this down to a science where it's either or. And then the compromise in the middle, which changes it, which tweaks the information. And the conclusion becomes yours. And you walk around saying, I am now informed. Well, you sure are. You are now brainwashed. Why brainwashed? The purpose is to usurp power from you, the individual, and trick you into slaving willingly towards the betterment of humanity. They always say it's for the good of mankind. It's always for our own good. But it's actually the benefit for the betterment of the elite. Just like I said, the meeting in Potsdam with the G8. That was the place, the home of the Hohenzollerns. That was the place they met to tally up the bill for the Second World War. And that's where they meet as you and I get together tonight in Potsdam, Germany, speaking on global warming. Why global warming? Why did they pick that? Why did they pick the weather? Because it's a global situation. It's global. It includes everyone. Every country. Every government. Now, can you see why this is the betterment of the elite who want the one world government, the new world order? Can you see through this black magic deception? Let's go farther. The beehive has always been the symbol of the perfect society in ancient Egypt, in the Minoan culture. That was known as the Bronze Age culture in Crete, that peaked about 3000 BC to 1100 BC. And Freemasonry also sees the beehive as the perfect system for the society of man. It's the one world government. Behave is from beehive. I can't help but thinking back to the Austin Power movies, drumming it into your head. Remember that line? Oh, behave. Meaning stay in your place. Do what's asked of you. Plato discussed the types of bees in relation to classes of people. The majority, that's us, were worker bees who brought home the nectar. The drone priests sorted it out into grades of honey. These would be the politicians, the corporate execs. You get what I mean. Those in a managerial power role. And the best, of course, the royal jelly, is kept for themselves and the queen bee, while the workers are given denaturalized waste. That's exactly the way they want the world to be. A beehive of activity for their betterment. Every single political move by every single government on the planet today is leading to the New World Order. A slow but sure, steady pace. Unlike modern Freemasonry, where the initiate must say, I am. Remember, that was the name of God in the Bible. He was the great I am. Pre-Jacques Perrian English had no am. So the initiate, to become a member of Freemasonry, said, I be. The number of Freemasonry is 4. Why 4? 4 is the foundation. And when you build, and the Masons are the builders of the world, when you build, it's 4 sides to start a building, and then up we go. It was even in Shakespeare. To be or not to be. 2 times B is 4. Or 2 plus 2 is 4. Check this out for etymology. Jacques is French for Jacob. Pierre is Peter, meaning the rock. Remember I said Jacques Perrian English. Jacques Pierre. Jacques, French for Jacob. Pierre is Peter, meaning the rock. This is typical Masonic allegory for Jacob's pillow, the foundation on which he had his dream. And that's a rehash of the Egyptian Book of the Dead story of ascended masters today known as Mithras. Mithraism began around what is now Iran, spread through Egypt and was scattered towards Rome. The nobility ruling Egypt and their empire were called Hamites. And the priesthoods taught their own race the doctrine of reincarnation. Those who ruled the pharaohs were spirits which had completed many cycles with such perfection they only returned to help rule the poor masses which couldn't rule themselves. In actuality, they were elitists, murderers, thieves, and liars. A brotherhood which hijacked reality and gave illusion in its place. That's what we're dealing with. That's another on God. Illusion. O-N. Ilu, meaning light. S-I-C, meaning soul. And the letters on. Put it all together, it's illusion. This is the etymology of the word illusion. The origin of the word. Every lodge, Freemason lodge, has its picture of Jacob's ladder. Rungs are degrees, symbolizing the ascension of the novice returning as angels to earth, perfected. These are the ones who are called gods by the Illuminati today. Albert Einstein was just one of those people. The Illuminati has used and set on a pedestal and teaches his lie to all that go through their education system. Einstein's formulation of the theory of relativity, space, measured by a ruler, physical time measured by a clock, are treated as non-existent in favor of their marriage. Time and space. Marriage does not simply unify them, but signifies the notion that there is more than just the periodicity of space. It's different than space. And in this sense, it's metaphysical, relating to a reality beyond what is a perception of our senses. Light is more an original or generating source physically than our space and time and matter. So, says Einstein, Lucifer is known as the bringer of light. Einstein almost said it himself. With the publication of his general theory of relativity, Einstein determined himself to spend the rest of his life generalizing that theory by way of light. Einstein said, and I quote, "For the rest of my life, I want to reflect on what light is." Light, in fact, was the focus of Einstein's entire career. You see, Einstein was searching for God in science. Remember, the Illuminati are going to use science to prove who God is. The Masonic Christ. Lucifer, the bringer of light. Spaceman. It's AM 640 Toronto Radio. According to Einstein, light is elevated to a supremacy over both space and time. He actually makes it seem to be the very source of space and time. We are taught to believe that the light rays journey light years across vast intergalactic distances. But is that really true? More in a moment. It's AM 640, Toronto Radio and a view from space.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640, Toronto Radio. History buffs, monarchists masticate, truth seekers cheer. He's the Spaceman with a view from space. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
I'm the Spaceman. This is AM 640, Toronto Radio. Just getting started. Got on at midnight. This is a show, by the way, that no one knows the exact time of when it starts. I want to welcome you here. I've been talking about Einstein. I've been talking about a little bit about brainwashing and informing and indoctrinating, which basically is forming your ideas for you. They could have never come along as far as they have with their New World Order if it was not for radio and for television, which is an incredible tool to form people's opinions. And also Einstein. The theory of relativity is just that, a theory. And as I've just alluded to, Albert Einstein was fascinated by light. And of course the Illuminati are going to use science to prove who God is. Lucifer, the bringer of light. So, light is elevated to a supremacy over space and time by Albert Einstein. He actually makes it seem, as I said, the actual source of space and time. Or God. Sun worshippers believe the light is God. We are taught to believe that the light rays journey light years across huge intergalactic distances, but Edward Harrison, a physicist, once wrote, "Space-time is constructed in such a way that the distance traveled by light is always zero." Light rays travel at no distance whatever in space-time. In the world of space-time, we're in contact with the stars. In other words, Einstein's general theory of relativity keeps a sound state of naivety, but useful concepts of space and time, and momentum and energy, that are actually an ill-informed judgment, a mistake, a lie, and comes to the conclusion that light is more meaningful, more important, more profound. He considered light as having intellectual depth and insight, also being very difficult to fathom or understand, a very deep, extending far below the surface. Meaning, an intellectual depth, meaning God. Through Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, they have the science, the illusion, the lie behind interstellar travel in space. Every single rocket that has ever lifted off to some planet or the moon has this so-called science behind it to make you believe it took place, when in fact it didn't. Then what are they doing with all the money supposedly spent on these missions, which are so many? Putting up satellites to control the weather, monitoring every nook and cranny of the Earth, deploying weaponry systems, communication systems, holographic projectors, mirrors, you name it. If you can think of it, it's probably up there now. And stuff you can't name is up there now. It's truly becoming a prison planet. More of that will be revealed as we go farther into the future. Everything I've mentioned is low Earth orbit. All the communication systems, the holographic projectors, the mirrors, the weaponry systems. It's all low Earth orbit, because they can only go so high up. More on that reason in a few moments on AM 640 Toronto Radio on A View from Space. quote Hitler, "The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it." One of Hitler's greatest scientists was a man named Werner von Braun. Just died back in 1977. When World War II finally ended, the CIA secretly smuggled Werner von Braun and several hundred more of Nazi Germany's leading scientists into the United States military-industrial complex. In other words, they broke up the Hitler Nazi army and took all the brains and split them between Britain, America, and Russia. Werner von Braun eventually became the director of NASA and is now known as the father of the U.S. space program. So this is what he said one time. "It's commonly believed that man will fly directly from the Earth to the Moon, but to do this we would require a vehicle of such gigantic proportions that it would prove an economic impossibility. Calculations have been carefully worked out on the type of vehicle we would need for the non-stop flight from Earth to the Moon and to return. The figures speak for themselves. 3 rockets would be necessary. Each rocket ship would be taller than the Empire State Building. That's 1,250 feet high. And weighing about 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, or some 800,000 tons. Werner von Braun. January 31st, 1958. The United States launches Explorer 1 and confirms the presence of the Van Allen radiation belts. Same year, July 29th, 1958, NASA is established by the National Aeronautics and Space Act. Like all branches of the military and government, NASA employees are Freemasons, all Freemasonry equipped, who typically fill many high-ranking positions in the chain of command. 1959, according to Bill Casing, library writer of technical publications and advanced research at Rocketdyne Systems, said it was estimated that there is a 0.0014, that's a 0.0014 chance of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth, taking into account the effects of radiation, solar flares, and micrometeorites. May 5, 61. The United States launches its first manned spaceflight program, appropriately named after the pagan god Mercury, who's a messenger, whose occult historical counterpart is Cush, the father of Nimrod. Mercury Redstone 3, which was known as Freedom 7, sends the first American and Freemason Allard Shepard into orbit. Same year, May 25, 61. Just 20 days later, President John F. Kennedy announces, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period would be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space." Almost a year later, February 20th, 1962, John Glenn, a 33rd degree Freemason, launches into orbit in Friendship 7 to become the first man to complete a full orbit of the Earth. How many times did he go around the Earth? Well, 3, of course. The Trinity. And the can that it was in, dubbed Friendship 7, 7. What a number for the Cain family of Freemasonry. Because, you see, it was to 7 generations of Cain that the curse continued. That's why we see the 7. The 8 we see so often now is because that's the number of the sun. The John Glenn space trip is mostly symbolic. This would be the completion of a cycle and the dawning of a new age for the NASA space program. James Oberg says this. Jimmy Oberg is an American space journalist and historian, looked at as an expert on the Russian space program. And I've said this before on AM 640, Toronto Radio, a view from space. If you'll notice, the Russians and the Americans, when they split up Hitler's brain trust, they never really had duplicate missions. The Russians always went up to sit and stay in space, and the American space program always went up and back, up and back, up and back. Sort of like a half-ton delivering the goods. The other program, the Russian program, sat up in outer space, and they both fit perfectly, neither one covering any of the other's missions. And now they've got a full-blown space program worldwide. More in a moment on AM 640, Toronto Radio. It's a view from space.
Ancient mystery religions, numerology, the Holy Grail decoded, and he goes deeper than a black hole in today's headlines. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
I'm Space. This is A View from Space on AM 640, Toronto Radio. You can email me at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. Thanks so much for all the mail already coming in now. Just been talking about Wernher von Braun running NASA and what he said about a non-stop flight from Earth to the moon. 3 rockets. Each rocket ship would be taller than the Empire State Building and would weigh 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary. So, that was in '54, I believe he said that. January 31st, 1958, the U.S. launches Explorer 1 and confirms the presence of the Van Allen radiation belts. Another flight in 58 established NASA, filled with Freemasons. 61, May 25th, Kennedy announced they were going to the moon. February 20th, 62, John Glenn launches into orbit in Friendship 7, goes 3 times around the Earth, of course, 3 being the Trinity. John Glenn's space trip is pretty much symbolic of a cycle, the dawning of a new age for the NASA space program, says Jimmy Oberg, a man who knew a lot about the Russian space program. And I've already pointed out that the Russian and American space programs never duplicated each other. They were in lockstep with one another. One didn't do, the other did. So they got the job done in half the time. They weren't competing against one another. That's another part of a lie. The Cold War was not real. You have to have a Hegelian dialectic. You have to have one side against the other to create the change, don't you? That's why the Cold War after the Second World War. And after the Cold War, well, we didn't need it anymore. Now we have the war on terror. It just keeps going. It's perpetual war. Jim Oberg is a very interesting character. After his service in the United States Air Force, he joined NASA in '75, where he worked until '97 at the Johnson Space Center on the Space Shuttle program. He worked in the Mission Control Center for several Space Shuttle missions. The most important one, the STS-1. He specialized in orbital rendezvous techniques. The very first Space Shuttle mission was with Jim Oberg. And this culminated, of course, in the planning of the orbit for the Shuttle Transport System 88 mission. 88 Double Sun. The first International Space Station assembly flight. That was number 88. Jimmy Oberg was approached by NASA to write a rebuttal. Two of the claims of the Apollo moon landings were all fake, but it's not clear that the manuscript was ever started, and NASA promptly announced their intention not to publish the book just as soon after they made the announcement that they had commissioned Jimmy Oberg to do it. See, there's a lot of people believe that interstellar travel is not possible. Not just me. June 3rd, 1965, astronaut Edward White is the first American to spacewalk during the Gemini 4 mission. December 18th, 1965, Gemini 7 completes over 200 orbits in a 14-day period, demonstrating the possibility of surviving a 2-week journey to the moon. 1966, NASA's budget peaks at nearly $6 billion. This was in '66. It's over 35 or 40 billion today. This year of 1966, NASA sent up a total of 6 teams of astronauts into space. That's 6 missions in 66. Well, that would give you 6 in 66. January 27, 1967, Apollo 1 and its crew are destroyed by fire during the test exercise. Apollo and the sun god was worshipped in ancient Egypt as Horus. In Babylon, he was worshipped as the redeemer of the world, the son of Semiramis. Tammuz. Queen of heaven was Semiramis. God tells us more about this false god, Apollyon. They have as a king over them the angels of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon. And in Greek, he has the name Apollyon. Abaddon means place of destruction, or the realm of the dead. He's described as king of the locusts, which rose at the sounding of the 5th trumpet. Abaddon is one of the infernal names used in Satanism, and is first on the list. And as I've already stated, it means destroyer. That's Apollo. Oh, and the number of the text I just read from, Revelation 9:11. November 9th, 11/9, backwards. 1967 was the next move by NASA. Apollo 4 launches the first unmanned flight of Saturn V. This rocket, named after the Roman god Saturn, whose occult counterparts are Nimrod, Kronos, Baal, Moloch, has a diameter of 33 feet and weighs a total of 2,500 tons. That's a 7 if you are keeping track. 7, of course. God cursed Cain's family for 7 generations when he murdered his brother Abel. This weight of the Saturn V versus Werner von Braun's calculations only a few years before differ by about, 32,000%. And this rocket, Saturn V, will be launched a total of 13 times over the next 7 years. Yes, I know, NASA loves their occult prime numbers, don't they? January 22nd, 1968, Apollo 5 launches to test the unmanned lunar module. April 4th, 68, same year, Apollo 6 launches another unmanned test flight of Saturn V. October 11th, 68, same year, NASA launches Apollo 7, the first successful manned Apollo mission. As you can see, they're speeding up rapidly now with Apollyon, or Abaddon, meaning place of destruction, the destroyer. Same year, December 21st, 68, again. Apollo 8 supposedly sends Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders to the moon. After 3 days, the Trinity again, they supposedly reached the moon and orbit for 20 hours. Earth-moon distance, about 3,085,000 kilometers, give or take a few clicks, depending on the position of the moon's orbit. Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio, talking about Apollo 8, the first flight to the moon. Didn't land, just orbited the moon. A little test shot. While the lunar orbits on Christmas Eve, the birthday of Tammuz, the son of Nimrod and Semiramis, who went to the sun, Nimrod did, Tammuz becomes the reincarnated Nimrod. So while in that lunar orbit on Christmas Eve, the crew makes a TV broadcast and they read from the book of Genesis. Spaceman back in a moment on AM 640 Toronto Radio.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640 Toronto Radio. He goes deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But can you take it? This is A View from Space with the Spaceman. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
It's a Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio, and A View from Space. You can email me at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. So just after a few years after Wernher von Braun, who ran NASA, who founded NASA, is the father of NASA, saying it would take 3 rockets. Each rocket ship would be taller than the Empire State Building at about 1,250 feet and weigh about 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, or some 800,000 tons. That's what type of vehicle would be needed for the non-stop flight from Earth to the moon, which is 3,085,000 kilometers away. Well, just like I said, a few short years after that, all of a sudden, Apollo 8, December 21st, 1968, so close to Christmas. As a matter of fact, when they were orbiting the moon at Christmas, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders read from Genesis, and you know the passage they read. Right at the beginning of Genesis, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And then Lovell does the next paragraph, and then Borman finishes off the piece. And Dr. Thomas Paine, NASA administrator at the time, said the mission was a triumph of the squares. The guys with computers and slide rules who read the Bible on Christmas Eve. Translation? They only read it on Christmas Eve, and when they do read it, they only read the part about light. The bringer of light. And this is a triumph of Freemasonry. It would be the translation. A triumph of the squares. So, March 3rd, 1969, Apollo 9 launches a 10-day manned orbit of the Earth. This is the first manned flight of the lunar module. May 18, 69, Apollo 10 launches the only manned Saturn V for a lunar orbit, equipped with the lunar module. Saturn, by the way, is another name for Satan. July 20, 1969, with the Apollo 11 command module, Columbia, playing the role of the pagan god Isis, Ishtar, Semiramis, suspended in orbit on the far side of the moon. The lunar module, Eagle, it's called, makes its descent to the lunar surface, supposedly. Neil Armstrong, supposedly, becomes the first man in history to set foot on the moon. That long anticipated transmission, the Eagle has landed, supposedly touches the hearts and minds of millions around the world who proudly witness this most significant black magic accomplishment in human history, the revelation or a belief in a new era in human potential. Interstellar travel is possible, and we can do it. By the way, there's only one picture of the first man ever to supposedly set foot on the moon, astronaut Neil Armstrong. He had his back turned towards the camera in the photograph. It's the only still photo taken of him, supposedly on the moon, and is standing inside the frame of a lunar lander leg. That's the shape of a triangle, or a pyramid. He's actually inside of a pyramid. What the ancient pharaohs used as their Gnostic teacher inside the pyramid, where they rose to another level and came out more perfect. 33rd degree Freemason Bud Aldrin actually attracted all the limelight. In fact, according to Masonic sources, Buzz Aldrin was the one who carried the flag as a special deputation by Grand Master J. Guy Smith, appointing Buzz Aldrin as special deputy of the Grand Master, granting him full power and authority to claim Masonic territorial jurisdiction for the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Texas. The ancient and free accepted Masons were now on the moon. Or so the black magic spell would have you believe, bringing about the creation of a brand new lodge known as Tranquility Lodge number 2000. Now, why would they name it 2000? They couldn't name it number 2 because everyone would wonder where Tranquility Lodge number 1 was. But with 2000, you don't even pay attention. 2 is the number they needed to use because 2 is total separation from God and had to be marked as such. And so it was. And Neil Armstrong blew his line. The one he was supposed to say on the moon, which you will hear in a few moments. In the Bible is written, the arrogance of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock and the loftiness of your dwelling place, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to earth? Though you build high like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there I'll bring you down, declares the Lord. That's an Obadiah. Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio, going over the brainwashing, the black magic spell cast upon the world that interstellar travel is possible. Here's something very intriguing about the photographs of astronauts in space. The reflection of the sun caught on the astronauts' visors from time to time, the sun's very small. This is because the sun is, maybe about 150 million kilometers away. During the Apollo missions, though, the reflection covers a lot more of the visor in both the videos and the still photos that you can see. That's because the moon landings were filmed using a giant artificial light source, not the sun. But NASA, of course, maintains the position no secondary light sources were ever used on the Apollo missions. But close analysis of countless photographs have proven otherwise. In 1998, the space shuttle soared to an altitude of 350 miles, one of the highest ever recorded except for the supposed Apollo missions, of course. At this altitude, the astronauts were still several hundred miles below the Van Allen radiation belts, which is at around 800 or 1,000 miles out there. And they had shielding superior to what the Apollo astronauts used in the space shuttle flight of 350 miles straight up. Yet they were exposed to so much radiation that they reported being able to see the radiation as shooting beams of light even when they closed their eyes. CNN even broadcast a report saying the radiation belt surrounding Earth may be more dangerous for astronauts than previously believed. The phenomenon, known as the Van Allen belts, can spawn killer electrons that can dramatically affect the astronaut's health. CNN. The fact is, space is an extremely hazardous place. The nuclear fission reactions of the sun release such massive amounts of energy, it actually creates a current of invisible cosmic rays through space. When these particles reach the Earth's magnetic field, some of them collect in what's called the Van Allen radiation belts. The waves of energy which pass through these belts are then filtered through the atmosphere and ozone. And what little energy is still there will still burn your skin if it's exposed too long. Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio. Let me give you an example. When you have an X-ray, the dentist or the doctor pulls a quarter-inch lead shield, big pack, over your torso to protect your vital organs from 1/100th of a second's exposure to radiation. The Apollo super astronauts, on the other hand, supposedly flew through the Earth's atmosphere through thousands of kilometers of dense solar radiation collected in the radiation belts, through another couple 100,000 kilometers of invisible currents of cosmic rays before entering the moon's orbit. The moon has little to no atmosphere, which consists of mostly hydrogen, helium, neon, radon, a toxic chemical outgassed from the moon's core. So what do you think happens to all of that unfiltered solar radiation which constantly bombards the surface of the moon? Do you really believe that anybody could survive that trip and then do it all again on the way back home? Are we to believe Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended to the surface of the moon in an aluminum can to place a new cornerstone in the evolution of mankind, to make our mark, to place our flag and our name in the heavens? Space back in more in a moment on AM 640, Toronto Radio.
You're listening to A View from Space with the Spaceman, exercising the right to free speech while he still can. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
The guy they call Space on AM 640, Toronto Radio. It's A View from Space. Talking about Apollo 11 and the brainwashing of indoctrination, of informing people, indoctrinating people. And as I've said earlier, without television, without radio, it would have been so difficult, so hard to cast the magic spell of a man setting foot on the moon. Unless you have the pictures and the sound, they didn't go there to the billions on our planet. But they had the pictures and they had the sound. And this is what it sounded like that night of July 20th, 1969.
Roger, Neil. Okay, stand by, Neil. Columbia, this is Houston, 1 minute, 30 seconds to LOS. All systems go, over.
Neil Armstrong on the porch at 109 hours, 19 minutes, 16 seconds.
Houston, this Neil, radio check. Neil, this is Houston, loud and clear. Break, Buzz, this is Houston, radio check and verify TV circuit breaker in. Roger, TV circuit breaker in. Update 5 clear. Roger.
Buzz is inside. Neil's out on the porch.
We're getting a picture on the TV.
And there it is. They see his picture on the TV. That was Neil Armstrong, standing on the steps but had not touched the moon's surface with his foot yet. That long-anticipated transmission the Eagle has landed went through the minds of millions, perhaps billions. Now, for sure, billions. You know, it's so hard to see ourselves as ones who can fly 3,085,000 kilometers in just 3 days. For me, it's a little difficult. But those are the hard numbers. And then I talked about the Van Allen radiation belt. And I know for sure when the Russians were trying to go up there and sit to be a parallel space program to the Americans whose job it was to go up and back, up and back, up and back. I know, because of the closed society that they had in the Soviet Union then, they could burn up a lot of astronauts trying to break through. I wonder how many guys they roasted in tin cans trying to cut through when they finally said, guys, let's quit. You can't get past it. There's nothing we can do to protect them to get through the Van Allen belt. So let's just keep on going with the hoax, Freemasonry says. Let's fake it. And I believe that's exactly what they did. Robert Anton Wilson said this: there is and has been since this nation's inception, America, a secret society that practices what the ancients termed sorcery, but which is nothing more than a kind of mind control, as yet unknown to the public. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. That's where there's no transmission. That's where you're totally in God's hands. It was where Columbia was a lot. Columbia was the lunar orbiter. The Eagle left the Columbia to touch down on the moon, they tell us. No, they've got ways. They have the most mysterious and fascinating areas of ritual work completed, involving those triggering mechanisms producing altered states of consciousness. And this is exactly what the moon landing myth has accomplished in the minds of almost every civilized human being on this planet. The unholy trinity of Saturn, which is Nimrod, Columbia. See, it was the Saturn rocket that took them up. This is the trinity. Columbia playing the part of Semiramis, Nimrod's wife, that orbited around the moon, and Apollo, Tammuz, the reincarnation of Nimrod, has forever become a symbol of pride and accomplishment. And you know it was the third moon landing attempt? Apollo 13 lifted off at 13:13 Central Standard Time. Supposedly suffered a critical explosion on the third day of the mission. The third day of the mission was April 13. All of the names, missions, landing sites, and events in the Apollo space program have echoed occult metaphors, rituals, and symbology of the Illuminati's secret religion. The most transparent was the faked explosion of the spacecraft Apollo 13, named Aquarius, or the New Age. At 1:13, military time, it was 13:13. On April 13th, 1970, which was the metaphor for the initiation ceremony involving the death, explosion, placement of the coffin, period of uncertainty of their survival. Because, remember, the world waited to see if they survived, and then communion with the spiritual world and imparting the esoteric knowledge to the astronauts, the orbit and observation of the moon without physical contact. The rebirth of the initiate, solution of the problem and repairs, and then the raising up, the Phoenix, the new age of Aquarius, by the grip of the lion's paw, re-entry and recovery of Apollo 13. 13 is the number of death and rebirth, death and reincarnation, sacrifice, the Phoenix, the Christ, perfected soul, imprisoned in matter, and the transition from the old to the new. Fred Kleinecht, head of NASA at the time of the Apollo space program, is now the sovereign grand commander of the Council of the 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry of the southern jurisdiction. That was his reward for pulling off this hoax, this stunt, this lie. All of the first astronauts were Freemasons. There was a photograph in the house of the temple and were Freemasons. There's a photograph in the house of the temple in Washington, D.C. of Neil Armstrong on the moon's surface in his spacesuit holding his Masonic apron in front of his groin. The movie Apollo 13 opens with a monologue by the actor-producer Tom Hanks, who walks forward revealing this huge representation of the god Apollo, who represents the sun, Osiris, Ashur, the first king of the first kingdom, guiding his chariot, pulled by 4 horses through the heavens. And we're told the astronauts walked on the moon's surface enclosed in a spacesuit in full sunlight, absorbing a minimum of 265 degrees of heat surrounded by a vacuum. NASA tells us the moon has no atmosphere and that the astronauts were surrounded by the vacuum of space. Let me return to what was said at the beginning of tonight's show on A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio. The masters of Gnosis dispensed the sequences of directives which, in scientifically designed order, form the ideas, opinions, and life, the beliefs, reality, and destiny of the receiver. You, when indoctrinated, you have completed your task. You have been mastered. You are now a master copy, if you believe NASA, about the landing on the moon. Back with more in a minute at Space on AM 640, Toronto Radio.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640 Toronto Radio.
Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
History buffs, monarchists masticate, truth seekers cheer. He's the Spaceman with a view from space. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
I'm the guy they call Space. Welcome back. It's AM 640, Toronto Radio. You heard Walter Cronkite telling the world, the most trusted newsman in the world on CBS News. Walter Cronkite was. Did you catch the age of Neil Armstrong? 38. 8 and 3 is, you guessed it, Apollo 11. Isn't that something? They don't miss a trick, do they? Well, yes, they do miss a trick or two. Let's listen now to Neil Armstrong as he sets foot, supposedly, on the moon.
I'm going to step off the limb now. It's one small step for man, one leap for mankind.
Well, there you have it. That was Neil Armstrong, supposedly the first person to walk on the moon, July 20th, 1969. Everybody back on Earth heard that crackle on their televisions and radios. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But since man in this context, without a the or an a man, means all human beings, and his sentence really says this: that's one small step for everybody and one giant leap for everybody. And he didn't want it to mean that. But he blew his rehearsed line. It's certainly not what the Apollo 11 commander intended. More important, later he insisted it's not what he said. Here's exactly what he said.
It's one small step for man, one leap for mankind.
That is definitely one small step. That's one small step for man, one hardly audible giant leap for mankind. But he insists that we got it wrong, not him. When he got back home, saw the mission transcript, as well as some newspaper and magazine coverage, he told reporters that he had been misquoted. NASA concluded that the "a" got lost in atmospheric static. The official record was changed, and even the New York Times printed a correction. But when they printed their correction, they actually took out the word giant leap and put in giant step. Another stumble, another bumble. Now, many people still continue to say and write man, not a man, when quoting Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon, either because of habit or because that's what their ears heard when the tape is played. What do you hear? Do you hear that's one small step for a man or one small step for man? Here it is again.
It's one small step for man, one leap for mankind.
Now, on a Masonic site, there is this. Put it last year, 2006. Neil Armstrong has always maintained that he placed the first human foot onto the moon, and what he meant to say and thought he did say one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. A much more meaningful statement than the often quoted one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, according to an Associated Press story on Space.com, a sophisticated voice analysis of NASA tape provides evidence that Armstrong did indeed include the crucial indefinite article "a." For us, as humankind, restoring that missing word is a small step, but it's a giant leap in the lasting symbolism of that moment. They blew the damn line. And now they're trying to say it was lost in atmospheric static. But a sophisticated voice analysis provided by NASA concludes that he did indeed say "a man." Could you just put your ear close to your radio one more time to see if you can clearly pick up that "a"?
It's one small step for man, one leap for
Yeah, okay,
mankind.
I rest my case. All right. You'd think if the Apollo moon landing had actually occurred, the film and photography used to document the events would be treasured and preserved like gold. No, diamonds in a vault. Yeah, NASA admits to losing them entirely. You heard me correct. Film and photos of the lunar landing have been mysteriously lost. Just listen to this article, what they say about it. NASA loses original tapes of Apollo 11 moon landing. Missing data shows significantly sharper images of Neil Armstrong's historic walk on the lunar surface. Call it one small mistake by somebody, one giant loss for mankind. Yeah, the original magnetic tapes that recorded the iconic images of man's first footsteps on the moon are actually missing. And scientists don't know where they are and are in danger of deteriorating into dust unless they're found quickly and converted to digital format. So it goes like this. Australian scientists at the Parkes Observatory in the Honeysuckle Creek tracking station in Australia have launched an intensive effort to find nearly 700 boxes, there's that number again, of original, high-quality, slow-scan TV tapes used to capture the Apollo 11 landing on July 21st, 1969. The two Australian stations, along with California's Goldstone station, received signals from the lunar base, supposedly. What the world saw, courtesy of Honeysuckle Creek tracking station, while many people are familiar with the grainy footage showing Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon's surface, most don't know that the original images sent to Earth were high-quality transmissions. The conversion of the original signal into a format that could be rebroadcast over standard television accounted for the blurry images of Armstrong and fellow lunar astronaut Buzz Aldrin. Yeah, right. What a weak excuse. We have really good quality footage, but we lost it. Or we could have shown you all the mistakes we made in the filming of it. In some airport hangar. The quality of what you saw on television at home was substantially degraded, says Jar Sarkisian, a scientist stationed at Parkes in Australia. These scientists at Parkes and Honeysuckle Creek took Polaroid photographs of the original high-quality images on their screens during the moon landing. Despite the degradation that technology introduced, their images are significantly sharper than those broadcast to the public over television, they say. So Sarkisian's interest in these tapes began in '97 when he was researching roles for the movie The Dish. And it wasn't until Sarkisian contacted colleagues at NASA that anyone realized the tapes were missing. Jeez, we don't know where those are. Gosh, that was just so long ago. Most people that worked on that mission are dead now, and, well, you know how it goes. We just don't know where they are. There's only one spacewalk on the moon. And they lost the footage. The good quality stuff. We still have the blurred stuff. You can still watch that. Which covers up most of their absolute blockbuster bungles. They're working on the assumption, by the way, that they still exist. And as to where they are, well, this guy asked about it in '97, and they still haven't come up with them. I guess your guess is as good as mine. Where they are. I know and you know they have them. They're just not about to ever release them. They are out of circulation. It's all for the mind control. It's all for the indoctrination. You see, so it is above, so it is below in the occult world. This is not new stuff. Hitler used the 1933 burning of the Reichstag, blamed it on a deranged Dutchman to declare a war on terrorism. Back with more of that in a moment on AM 640, Toronto Radio.
Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman. AM 640, Toronto Radio.
You can email me at space@640toronto.com as always, or spaceman@640toronto.com. It's A View from Space. This is AM 640 Toronto Radio. Just wrapping up a session on indoctrination. Black magic spells from NASA. The Apollo program. Hitler, as I said just before the break, used the burning of the Reichstag in 1933 to establish his legitimacy as a leader, even though he didn't win a majority in the previous election. You are now witnessing the beginning of a great epoch in history, he proclaimed, standing in front of the burned-out building, surrounded by national media. This fire, he said, his voice trembling with emotion, is the beginning. He used the occasion, a sign from God, he called it, to declare an all-out war on terrorism and its ideological sponsors, people, he said, who trace their origins to the Middle East and found motivation for their evil deeds in their religion. No, I'm not reading an excerpt from the speech of George W. This is Adolf Hitler. 2 weeks later, after that speech, the first prison for terrorists was built in Oranienburg, holding the first suspected allies of the infamous terrorist. In a national outburst of patriotism, the nation's flag was everywhere, swastikas everywhere, even printed in newspapers suitable for display. Within 4 weeks of the terrorist attack, the nation's new, now popular leader had pushed through legislation in the name of combating terrorism and fighting the philosophy, he said, spawned it, that suspended constitutional guarantees of free speech, constitutional guarantees of privacy, and habeas corpus. Habeas corpus meaning you got to have a body before we have a trial. Police could now intercept mail, wiretap phones, Suspected terrorists could be imprisoned without specific charges and without access to their lawyers. Police could sneak into people's homes without warrants if the case involved terrorism. No, again, I am not reading an excerpt from a news story from the War on Terror and the United States of America and Britain. It's Adolf Hitler. To get his patriotic decree on the protection of people and state passed over the objections of concerned legislators and civil libertarians, he agreed to put a 4-year sunset provision on it if the national emergency provoked by the terrorist attack of the Reichstag building was over by then. The freedoms and rights would be returned to the people, and the police agencies would be restrained. I've said it before on this very show, AM 640, Toronto Radio, A View from Space. Once they take away one of your freedoms, you never get it back. Because that's why they took it away in the first place. Within the first months after the terrorist attack, at the suggestion of a political advisor, he formally he brought a former obscure word back into common usage. This will blow your mind. Instead of referring to the nation by its name, he began to refer to it as the fatherland. As hoped, people's hearts swelled with pride, and the beginning of an us versus them mentality began to grow. Our land was the homeland, citizens thought, all over Germany. All others were simply foreign lands. Ein Ausländer. A foreigner. Doesn't this sound exactly what George W. did with Homeland Security? Within a year of this terrorist attack, Hitler's advisors determined that the various local police and federal agencies around the nation were lacking the clear communication and overall coordinated administration necessary to deal with the terrorist threat facing the nation, including those citizens who were of Middle Eastern ancestry, and thus probably terrorist sympathizers. He proposed a single new national agency to protect the security of the fatherland, consolidating the actions of dozens of previously independent police, border, and investigative agencies under a single powerful leader. This was known as the Reichssicherheitshauptamt and Schutzstaffel, simply otherwise known as the SS. And maybe most important, he invited his supporters in industry into the halls of government to help build his new detention camps, his new military, and his new empire, which was to herald 1,000 years of peace. Industry and government worked hand in glove in a new type of pseudo-democracy, first proposed by Mussolini in Italy. The same exact series of events has occurred with the 9/11 attacks. In 1939, Nazi government officials seized a radio station and broadcasted a message in Polish, urging the Poles to attack the Germans. That is, Nazi government soldiers seized a radio station, broadcasted a message in Polish, urging the Poles to attack the Germans. They immediately staged the attack themselves. Consequently, Hitler told the German people they were being attacked by Polish insurgents, which provided the support needed to invade Poland and to kickstart WW2. Sort of like weapons of mass destruction by Saddam Hussein. Now they're in Iraq. Iran is next. This is a little different. Iran is a little different. We're talking about an American dollar that's sunk below 83 cents this past Friday. And those corrections they've been talking about in the market is all about keeping that dollar as high as possible. Over 84 cents if they can help it. It slipped below 84 on Friday and closed there. Imagine what it's going to be like Monday morning at the New York Stock Exchange. Pandemonium. And what if, just what if, those new sanctions that are put on Iran force them to adopt the euro, then open their own oil exchange, and then sell to only preferred customers, and block the Strait of Hormuz, an oil choke point, where no oil could get over to the Western world. How about oil up to about $110 a barrel, maybe higher, at which point no industry will be able to make a profit. So it will be futile to go to work. You can't make any money. The price of oil is too high. That could happen when Iran is provoked even further. So, it seems to me the White House has but one alternative, and that is to attack. What else can they do? The dollar's sinking. The oil's going to be shut off. And there we have the Hegelian dialectic. The families who have been doing business together for over 1,000 years are back at it. Going back even 1,000 more years. Their symbol was the eagle. They're meeting now in Potsdam, the Hohenzollern home of the double-headed eagle. This has been a view from space on AM 640 Toronto Radio, coast to coast. Next time, space. I'm out.